All the Birds Singing, a brief talk about gimmicks. Part 1, a brief overview about the novel and me. I purchased Evie Wyld's novel, All the Birds Singing, as another mildly random pick. While on another aimless trip to the local Barnes & Noble, I found this novel at the start of the fiction section, where the store presents new, noteworthy, and noteworthy due to their newness, writers. I checked out the cover, with its faux Barnes & Noble endorsed sticker. I read the back cover and the synopsis. I remember the synopsis appealing to me. I do not remember, but I assume the blurbs about the writer's credentials intrigued me. Picking a novel based on the author's credentials runs into a few issues. I have a selection of authors whom I favor. When they release a new novel, I will try to pick it up in a timely manner. With new authors, however, I stumble into uncertainty. One part of me wants to pick novels without influence from blurbs about awards. Another part of me, having trudged through a number of bad books, wants to rely on third-party recommendations. At the time I purchased the novel, I had not heard of Evie Wyld. This unfamiliarity drew me to the book. The listing of her accolades gave me confidence about her skills. Digressing further, I have read a number of what I consider bad books. I will not explain in great detail my definition of bad, since that discussion could grow unwieldy. For this current essay, I rate the author's skill with prose as high as plot and story, if not more. As such, my definition of good and bad may contain factors other people either do not consider or do not care to consider. To me, reading a bad book contains several negatives outside of sitting through a boring story. Each bad book reminds me that my own novels remain unpublished. Somehow, this bad book got published and purchased while my novels, which may vary in quality, may never see the light. A boring story bores, but a bad book feels like a personal insult. As another bit of digression, I will admit that Evie Wyld's accolades inspired some good jealousy. Instead of retreating, it makes me want to progress. I should probably submit short fiction to more contests. I could. However, I experience hesitation due to my lack of existing publications. This creates a circle where I think that winning contests will help my publications, but I do not want to enter more contests because of my lack of publications. This particular subject never arises when I talk with people about my reading habits. They tend to ask if a novel had a good story or not. Those issues aside, I did enjoy All the Birds Singing. I found the story interesting. It had a healthy dose of intrigue and menace. This menace especially shined at the start of the novel. The first couple chapters really hooked me with the tone and atmosphere. Also, the novel did not take long to finish. The words and paragraphs moved at a brisk pace without losing sophistication. The prose adopts a sparse attitude that emphasizes the imagery rather than having heavy imagery that tries to impress the reader. Overall, I enjoyed the novel. I would recommend it to other people. I also would like to pick up some of Evie Wyld's other work. At the time of writing this, I have not had the opportunity. The plot starts out with a simple premise. Jake White operates a farm on a British island. The novel begins with her investigating the gruesome death of her sheep. This investigation opens into mystery, especially when she encounters a strange man on her remote property. Meanwhile, the novel has a secondary narrative detailing Jake's past. This narrative provides characterization and motivation by making the reader privy to Jake's sordid history. Both narratives work well together and culminate into a satisfying ending. As I said, overall I enjoyed this novel. I give it high marks. However, I have one issue that weakens the experience. This weakening does not ruin the novel, but I cannot help to speculate about what could have been. I think the gimmick of the second narrative weakens the first. Part 2, a brief mention about gimmicks. I use the term gimmick as a broad term in lieu of multiple but slightly different terms. People may look upon the term gimmick negatively. They may think that my usage of the term constitutes an immediate and unwarranted negative declaration. I understand how affected people can react to the perception of immediate and unwarranted negative declaration. They defend this product that they enjoy from undue criticism. Certain terms seem more liable to spark these reactions. I have seen people snap back when I had used the term manipulation which required me to explain that manipulation does not always mean something negative. Gimmick does not always mean something negative. Positive and negative depend on the gimmick's usage. Lots of material uses gimmicks. The presence of a gimmick does not indicate the quality of the material. I think when I use gimmick, people form mental images of low-quality TV, where gimmicks stand obvious to the studio audience. We often use gimmick to describe a media practice to entice audiences and to trick audiences to overlook shortcomings. Gimmicks appear everywhere, though. They appear as certain casting or a way to portray a narrative. You can see it in TV shows, you can see it in genre fiction novels. You can also find it in literary fiction. The presence of the gimmick does not indicate quality, it just indicates the presence of a gimmick. I could run through a list of gimmicks that I have encountered. However, this list would run long and never get to a point. Instead, I will try a generic overview. One could consider epistolary novels as a gimmick. Those novels do not deliver their narratives in an augmented manner. The reader's prejudices about these various epistles work as an adhesive for these narratives. Most people know of Dracula. Rick Moody's novel, Hotels of North America, uses the epistolary gimmick. It also uses a further gimmick of using online reviews of hotels instead of the typical letters and missive. I enjoyed both novels, whether because of or in despite of their gimmick. For a more visual gimmick, consider the Christopher Nolan movie Dunkirk. The movie follows 3 different threads braided around a singular event. Each thread also moves through time at different paces. One thread starts hours earlier than another, but they converge at the same length within the film. The gimmick stands clear within the movie. One would have to blink at the right time for lengths longer than the usual blink in order to miss this gimmick. Still, I enjoyed the movie. I also admit that part of my enjoyment comes from the gimmick. Some gimmicks do not achieve the same effectiveness. I had mentioned low-quality TV earlier. In my life as a casual critic to shows and movies, I've seen an unknown number of people lambast the gimmicks of a despised TV show. Sometimes these people will focus their criticism on the gimmick. Some people may like a show as a sum of all its parts. Some people may find one part too grievous to ignore. I do not fault either group. I understand the nature of personal appeal. I only wish one side could understand the other. For a quick example, sitcoms constantly display gimmicks, usually in the characters. Instead of solely relying on a person thrusted into a hilarious situation, sitcoms will thrust a gimmicky person into a hilarious situation. The Big Bang Theory, a successful show which receives plenty of negative reviews, relied on a gimmick by making the cast nerds. The nerd descriptor does not always determine the action of an episode. Instead, the nerd element stirs a prejudicial response in the audience. The cast of Seinfeld or Friends arguing about seating arrangements contains a different value than when the cast of The Big Bang Theory argue, because of what and who the different characters represent. Part 3. A brief overview of the novel's gimmick. You can divide All the Birds Singing in half. The odd-number chapters tell the story of Jake White on her farm, uncovering the mystery behind the death of her sheep. These chapters run forward in chronology. In the first chapter, the novel establishes an ominous mood. This mood builds and builds, constructed by reassurance of the farm's solitude and the appearance of a stranger who appears harmless but obviously keeps a secret. This ominous atmosphere should grow darker and more oppressive, but it does not. A singular issue relieves the building tension. The even-numbered chapters tell of Jake's history before operating the farm. These chapters run backward through chronology. The last even-numbered chapter shows the earliest events in the story. These chapters provide background for the character and tell an interesting enough story of a young woman struggling to survive through prostitution and then harsh manual labor. I call the combination of evenly splitting the story between alternating chapters and the use of reverse chronology the novel's gimmick. Either half of the story would stand on its own. The combination of these halves create a story that I enjoyed. I also did not find the gimmick distracting or unnecessary. Other stories have played with chronology. The malleability of chronology can enhance themes or atmosphere. The audience could gain an epiphany through placement rather than through the actions of the plot. The end of the novel, when the reader arrives at the first event, the story takes on a different gravity. The events mean something different. I like this, and I found it fascinating that a small change can create a large impact. However, the gimmick in the second half of the novel lessens the tension in the first half. The novel presents the death of the sheep as a mystery and then presents the second half, which recounts Jake's history, as a potential explanation behind the mystery. The novel sets up the situation, or possible meta-narrative, that the reader might find the answers to the first half in the second half. After a handful of chapters, though, the reader will learn that the second half will not answer the first half. This creates a slow middle. The novel starts strong and ends strong. In the middle, though, it drags. The sense of dread the reader might feel while anticipating the moment in the even-numbered chapters to foreshadow or to reveal completely the sheep killer's identity fades quickly. As such, we have a problem. The gimmick that enhances one part of the story diminishes another part of the story. This happens often with gimmicks and might explain why the term has such a negative connotation. As a whole, I enjoyed the novel. I think E.V. Wilde did a fantastic job constructing it. Still, I have to consider the novel as the sum of its parts, as well as an occurrence of parts. I have to wonder how I judge material, what criteria I use, and whether the aforementioned criteria represents a static standard. The value of one criterion may change from novel to novel. One novel might place more importance on one criterion, therefore giving the criterion more sway in the final criticism. In my history of reading books among my family and peer group, I have fielded all manners of questions. They ask me what a book is about. They ask me whether or not it has a happy ending. They have asked me why I still read a book that I do not like. I sometimes find it hard to answer these questions. When they ask me what a book is about, I consider if I should give a synopsis of the plot or attempt to explain the themes. A plot might be weak, but the themes or atmosphere or writing might carry me through a novel. I run into a similar problem with All the Birds Singing because of its gimmick. I like the novel. I like the author's writing style and the novel's prose. I like the story. And I like the gimmick in spite of the gimmick. All material. This has been Bennett Durkin, and this has been an essay from my library.